You may have heard of Mike the Headless Chicken before, the chicken that survived for over a year after being decapitated. Despite dying in 1947, Mike is still internationally famous. People all over the world know that this chicken had his head cut off and still lived for quite a long time, but I don't think many people know how, or have even really given it all that much thought. I mean, we all know that if you cut the head off a human, they die. And we know why. The brain needs a supply of blood and oxygen. If it doesn't have that, well, no more brain. And the body needs the brain to tell it what to do. You're not going to be walking around without a brain giving your muscles electrical signals, and you'd obviously have no way to maintain balance. But Mike was able to walk around. Even basic functions like breathing or maintaining a heart rate, things you don't even need to think about. It's still your brain telling your body what to do. So how did Mike survive without a head? Whatever was going on with this freaky chicken, could the same thing happen to a human? You'll probably get into a lot of trouble if you attempt to find this out by yourself, so allow me to explain all. On the evening of the 10th of September 1945, in Colorado, USA, farmer Lloyd Olson and his wife Clara were preparing chickens for the market. Lloyd would behead them with an axe, and Clara would clean them up. 40 or 50 chickens got the axe that day, but one of them got back up and was running around. The Olsons were not all that surprised, because this kind of thing is not an impossible occurrence. You see, after a beheading, the circuits in the spinal cord still have some residual oxygen and energy resources, and without input from the brain, the neurons can activate spontaneously, resulting in some random movements like the legs kicking, and in rare cases, full-on running. Even the bodies of beheaded humans have been observed twitching. This generally only lasts a few seconds or minutes until the residual oxygen and energy are depleted though. But this headless chicken just did not stop. It was walking around like nothing had happened hours later. The Olsons thought this was kind of freaky, but assumed the chicken would eventually succumb to its injuries like the others, and placed it in a box on their screened porch for the night. The next morning, Lloyd would retrieve the chicken's carcass and bring it with the others to the market. But come the next morning, Lloyd found the chicken was still alive. He wasn't really sure what to do, but seeing as the farm was struggling to get by, he didn't really have the luxury to sit around and ponder life's mysteries. So he loaded up the wagon with the chickens to sell and brought the live one with him. As he went through the markets, selling the chickens, talking to people, he couldn't resist showing the headless wonder off to see what everyone else made of it, although his excitement was tempered by the practicality of a poor farmer, so he came up with kind of a funny way of going about this. "I'll bet you a beer that I have a live chicken what's got no head on it." "You're on, boy, but no tricks, or you owes me a beer." "No tricks." "Well, I'll be damned." After Lloyd had won this bet a few times, he decided the chicken might be worth more to him alive than dead. "I'll call you Mac, after Mike Carlin Black Label what you won for me." The headless chicken still attempted to peck for food, although it obviously didn't have much success, so Lloyd began feeding the bird himself, using an eyedropper to feed it a mixture of milk and water and giving it small grains of corn and worms. He noticed Mike had trouble clearing mucus from his throat, so Lloyd did that for him with a syringe. After his stunts at the market, word had spread around town about Lloyd's miracle chicken, and he soon had a reporter at his door from the local newspaper. One interview later, and the story had spread even further. 2 weeks later, a man showed up to the farm looking for the chicken. He had travelled nearly 300 miles from Salt Lake City in Utah. He explained to the Olsons that he was a sideshow promoter and he wanted to take Mike the Headless Chicken on tour. The Olsons weren't really in a position to turn down an opportunity to make decent money, so they travelled to Salt Lake City, but their first stop wasn't a sideshow, it was the University of Utah. If the promoter was going to be paying good money for a headless chicken, he wanted to make sure this wasn't something he could easily do himself. Scientists at the university studied Mike and discovered how he was still able to walk around and act like a chicken when it seems like he should be dead. You see, most of a chicken's brain is located in the back of its head, with its brainstem extending down into its neck. Lloyd had beheaded poor Mike pretty high up on the neck, so far in fact that Mike still had one ear attached. Also attached were the parts of the brain responsible for reflex actions, so even though Mike was missing some higher brain centres, he still had central motor generators that enabled him to breathe and digest food. Unlike a chicken, if a human loses their head, no matter how high up the cut, almost all of that brain is gone with the head, so no, you couldn't recreate this with a human. Birds also have a secondary balance organ located in the pelvic region, so Mike could still walk despite the balance system in his brain being destroyed. Supposedly, the scientists tried to replicate Mike's condition by surgically removing a bunch of chickens' heads with cuts in the same location, but they all died shortly after. It's thought the reason for Mike's lasting survival was Lloyd had missed the jugular vein, and Mike just happened to have a blood clot that prevented him from bleeding to death. With an interesting explanation and an assurance that this was a very rare occurrence, the sideshow promoter took the chicken, and the Olsons, around the US where Mike the Headless Chicken was exhibited alongside other peculiarities. As his fame grew, he was photographed for magazines and newspapers, and at the height of his popularity, he was making the Olsons $4,500 a month, which would be around $60,000 in today's money. The Olsons couldn't stay on tour forever though. They had to return to the farm to bring in the harvest. They used the money to modernise the farm, buying a hay baler and 2 tractors, replacing a horse and a mule. They must have been raging, lost their job because of a damn chicken. Lloyd even replaced his wagon with a Chevrolet pickup. Life was sweet, but it was not to last. In 1947, the Olsons took Mike to Phoenix, Arizona. Staying in a motel, they were awoken one night to the sound of Mike choking. They went for the syringe they used to clear his throat, but realised they had left it in the sideshow. They could do nothing but watch on as Mike choked to death. Man, this story is so fucked up. They returned to the farm Headless Chicken-less and farmed for the rest of their lives. When asked where Mike was, Lloyd was apparently too embarrassed to admit he had let his golden goose die under his watch, and instead told people he had sold him to a sideshow. This led to rumours of Mike's continued survival for years afterwards. Lloyd must have been pretty devastated by the loss of the chicken, but easy come, easy go. Yeah, he never became filthy rich, but he had made enough to help the farm immensely and make his life easier, and he'd got to see parts of the country he otherwise probably never would have. And besides, a neighbour was convinced that he was indeed filthy rich and would sometimes come by with some beers in an attempt to get Lloyd to tell him how he created the Headless Chicken. Life was sweet. To this day, Mike holds the world record for longest surviving headless chicken. That's one of those records that you probably wouldn't be too happy to hold. Well, you'd have to be a chicken for a start, but anyways, if you liked the video, I have many more in a similar style for you to watch. You can subscribe to see more in the future, and you can follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok to see my videos over on those platforms too. Until next time, stay safe.
One still was alive walking around. Now he told me that, on occasion one would get up and they'd flop around and maybe live for a few minutes, but they'd always go ahead and die. But they had one that didn't die.
Any normal man would reach down, picked him up, and cut his damned head off. Again. But not Ole.